All right, welcome everyone to the next episode of Casey's Case Start, where we have honest, funny, and sometimes downright hilarious conversations with innovators, founders, and business leaders on their journeys from the ground up. We hope you'll find hidden knowledge and inspiration as we extract key insights and expertise through the bad, the good, and the ugly of the entrepreneurial journey. I'm joined today by my good friend, David Joo, who's also on the board for KSC. David, welcome to Case Start. Thank you for being a guest.
Thanks, Sang. Thanks for having me. It's exciting.
So, Dave, for those, you're famous anyway. So everybody who's listening to this probably already knows who you are. But for those select few that haven't had the pleasure of meeting you, can you give us a brief intro on yourself and what you're working on?
My name is David Joo. I'll go all the way back from the beginning.
Sure.
And I was a bio major in college, and I thought that I would be a doctor. I realized really quickly that I wasn't smart enough to be a doctor. And so instead, I went into investment banking. And I did essentially everything under the sun in investment banking. Capital markets, leverage finance. I was an investor at Goldman's Principal Strategies Group, sales and trading. I was COO of two groups. I've done a lot of stuff within the investment banking realm. And then in 2012, I got connected with my co-founders. And just because I'm an investment banker, I thought, hey, it would be a good idea to start an education technology company. And I knew nothing about education and I knew nothing about technology. I joined this group of amazing individuals and we built a company starting in 2012. We sold the business in 2018 and we had a 2-year lockup and I left. Well, my lockup ended in August of 2020 and then March of 2021, I kind of gave myself about 6 months to transition out. And so March of 2021, I officially left the business. And then since then, I have been doing just angel investing and advisory work for startups, primarily as an entrepreneur in residence at Morgan Stanley's Inclusive Ventures Lab. And so, that's kind of me in a brief nutshell.
Awesome. Thanks for the background. That's you now, but like everyone I get on the show, I always like to try to get like to the nitty gritty, right? Like the origin story, if you will, the origin hero story.
My origin story is not crazy. Dad was a professor at the University of Minnesota. We came over, and as a professor, you have tenure, and so you just stay. And so I was born in Korea, and then came over when I was about 2.5, and grew up in Minnesota. I went to Carleton College, which is in Minnesota, and then straight out of Carleton, I went straight to Wall Street in New York.
Right.
So I've lived in Minnesota and New York, and that's it.
Yeah. But Minnesota in and of itself, right? When we first met, you told me like you came from Minnesota. I'm like, no, that's not like a thing, right? Like what could have possibly brought you there, right? And it's like, well, that makes sense. Like your father was a professor there, but you're the third guest so far that we've had, well, including myself, where like the parents are in academia and then the children are just complete black sheeps. And they just end up doing like business or something else that is like completely unrelated, right, to academia. But also, the parents in academia had some like level of liberalness. I don't know how to describe it, but it's like, oh yeah, you want to pursue this? Like, okay, you could do that. What was it like for you? Were your parents a little bit more traditional? They wanted you to be a banker or a doctor?
Yeah, definitely. Doctor, lawyer.
Yeah.
Definitely. But
yeah.
I still remember during my dad's retirement party, all of these folks kind of stood up and they gave a talk about my dad. And it was really interesting. One of the themes that they discussed was how entrepreneurial he was as a professor.
Right.
He's got several patents. He'd worked with a bunch of companies to try and develop other things. And even today, he's in his 80s and he is consulting with companies about new products and other things. And so maybe it's subconscious or deep within my genes, right? The entrepreneurial aspect, but I think there's something there, but pretty, traditional kind of upbringing.
Right. Well, I don't
Nothing.
think there's anything traditional about that, right? Because he could have had professorship in Korea, right? He could have pursued something like that. I think coming over in and of itself is a journey, right?
It is, yeah, it's a big
Yeah.
deal. But
Yeah.
I look back at that and I'm just so thankful because I know myself and I am not an academic person, and so
Yeah.
given how much success in Korea is determined based upon how well you do in school or how smart you are, I would not have done well in Korea. And so, yeah, I am very, very thankful we grew up in Minnesota. Yeah. So, bringing up my dad again, since I grew up in the States, I obviously didn't go to Kunde, and my dad's a little old school Korean, and has that philosophy that a man becomes a man by going through, the hardship of Kunde in Korea.
Uh-huh.
He said to me when I went to college, 군대 안 갔으니까 고생해.
Yeah.
Which for those who don't speak Korean, it means, hey, since you didn't go to the army, suffer
Yeah.
while you're in college. And I kind of laughed and whatever. While that suffering didn't necessarily happen in college, I did take that to heart in the context of investment banking, and I worked hard. I worked harder. And look, the reality is, coming from a biology background, I knew nothing. I was totally out of my depth. And I had to work harder and smarter just to keep up with everyone.
Right.
But I worked hard. There were two instances where I worked over 60 some hours straight, where
Wow.
15-minute nap under the desk.
Right.
We had this conference center where I would go down and they had these telephone booths. I would go down into this telephone booth and close the door and call up a buddy of mine and say, hey, can you call this number in 15 minutes?
Wow.
And I would take a 15-minute nap and just plow through. And it was just, it taught me so much though about what I could handle and how to kind of work smarter rather than harder. I remember another instance where I really screwed up on something, and we had this pricing sheet, and I needed to input some numbers, and these numbers weren't inputted, and so half the sheet was right and the other half was wrong.
Right.
And my boss calls me on the road, and he let me out.
Shit.
Yeah, it was yeah.
Yeah.
But what I did after that was actually build a automated way so that I would never forget to input those numbers. Yeah. And I found out later that my group was still using that nearly 10, 15 years after I'd left.
Right.
And so, it was, trial by error, learning through failure, appreciating the second chances. Yeah.
Yeah.
All of that. Investment banking, it's tough. It is really, really tough. But I personally really gained a lot from that experience.
But I do think, like when I talk to other people that are less appreciative, I guess they're still in banking or they're a little bit more junior still, right? And they're looking to break out or do something else, and they're like kind of burnt out. And I'm like, I feel that way personally too, right? There are things that you learn in banking that are not, you can't really learn anywhere on the job, whether it's like emotional resilience or the aspect of just figuring it out. Like no one cares. Like no one, there's no soft edges to this, right? They don't care how you do it, whether you don't sleep for 60 hours, you pass out, like that's not an excuse to not get it done, right? Yeah, you don't do that again. And you spend another 2-3 days licking your wounds and doing that again. But let's talk about like the next part of it where you became the startup founder, and we can kind of deep dive into that. But I do think those aspects are valuable in startup, right? Like in a way of you don't quit, you can kind of just figure it out and you don't really like feel bad about things. What do you think about that?
Look, I was having this conversation literally yesterday with another founder that I advise. And, I was talking to her about successful founders and whatnot.
Yeah.
And when you think about, successful founders, and, we're not talking about the likes of, Zuckerberg or Bezos,
Yeah.
Even someone who's had an exit, right?
Yeah.
Just being able to survive. 10% of that is probably skill.
Yeah.
And the other 90% is grit, just perseverance, and luck, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what the
absolutely.
breakup of that 90%.
But there's a lot of luck, for sure. Yeah.
There
it's
is
a huge amount of luck.
And look, I put timing into the luck bucket.
Sure.
Right. And you can be smart about timing sometimes, but a lot of timing is luck. And so but the other portion that just, I used to have this graph that we would show at our company-wide meetings. And it was this, arrow that went from the bottom kind of asymptotically up. And it was kind of broken up into stages.
Mm-hmm.
The first stage, or it was broken up into two stages. The stage on the right was thrive.
Okay.
The stage on the left is just survive.
Don't die.
Yeah. You literally, in startup land, in order to thrive, you just have to survive.
Right.
Now, there are some companies where that survival period is shorter than others.
Yeah.
And then there are some companies where that survival period is a really long time.
Yeah.
But you just have to survive.
Yeah. And that's underappreciated, I think, right? The difference between a lot of new founders and everything, they look for something, a secret sauce, right? Some kind of heuristic. Yeah. What do they do when they wake up and whatever? It's they kept going when they woke up. That's the big difference is they weren't I throw in the towel. This is too hard for me. No, they just kept going, right? And then I think, but that is tied to luck, right? You have to create enough surface area for luck to hit you in the face. But if you don't, then that luck doesn't land anywhere, right? You can't find that opportunity because you're not doing it anymore. Even if the industry has come in your favor, for example, where you're oh, I thought I was too early, and you're 1 day away. You're an AI company for enterprise, and you're 1 day away from OpenAI announcing their LLM, and then you quit the day before. Yeah.
Well, I used to talk about how luck, or not luck, but intelligence or smarts was less about obviously being smart and more about recognizing opportunity and being able to take advantage of the luck that's presented to you. Because, I think that there are always opportunities that people are presented with. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's just, it's a question of, hey, am I smart enough to recognize that this is an opportunity?
Right.
That's obviously one thing. And then the second thing is, do I have the risk tolerance to actually go all in on this opportunity? Both of those are hard to do. Look, that's why 90% of startups fail. It's hard.
Right. Super hard. I mean, but the second part, that's an interesting one because I feel like that's a recurring theme that's coming up more and more as I speak to people, which is the risk tolerance, right? So we had a guest, I finished recording, and he was saying he did both, corporate and startup, right? And he was saying, but he wasn't the CEO. He was brought on as a co-founder, right? To support the branding or marketing. And he was saying that he realized he didn't have the risk tolerance, right? He was doing it and he didn't have the appreciation for the chaos, right? The ability to create in chaos, which creation happens in chaos, right? So the ability to appreciate that and do that, he didn't have that. Do you think that's a thing or that's learned? Do you think it's a hard-coded thing?
No, that is me. Here, I'll tell you my somewhat. I'll tell you a story. I was on a panel once, and were you moderating the panel? You might have actually been
highly likely.
And I was on this panel, and the question was, hey, why did you start this company?
Mm.
And I think there was four of us, and there was the first guy all the way at the end. I'll never forget the way that he answered it. He said, I had this idea, and I couldn't imagine a world without this product. And so I went out and I built it.
Okay.
And there were literally from the audience like gasps, like like, my goodness, it's amazing, right?
Yeah. Touch my
And
soul with his
everyone,
finger.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it just kind of it went down the road, and it got to me, and I'm a pretty transparent guy, and I said I helped to co-found Nori because
Yeah.
I got laid off from my job and I had nothing else to do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it is absolutely that reality, at least for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
That taking the risk is not necessarily inherent in my DNA. I think that's part of the reason why advisory work with startups today has been really, really fun for me. Just because I can really help shape this chaos building without actually having to take the risk.
But I mean, I guess like when you're starting a company though, I guess the person that's responsible for that part, right? Like the of let's call it like speaking it into existence, let's say, right? Like, and then you have other co-founders that do other things because someone's busy speaking things into existence and it's just a mess. And then they're trying to walk through walls and someone's like, there's a door, you should use the door, right? So I don't think every co-founder needs to appreciate that. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Like the whole point of having co-founders is to find people who complement the things that you don't have, right?
Yeah.
And so when we started our company, we had 5 co-founders.
Wow.
We all had our lane. We all did different things, and we all had different risk tolerances. We all had different kind of specialties. It was a highly, highly symbiotic experience. And so, And if you can find that, it's great. Sometimes that doesn't work out. You know, there's a lot of companies where co-founders split. You know, it's just kind of the nature of starting a business.
So, I mean, that's one lesson that you learned then, right? When you were doing startup, which is I don't have the risk tolerance. Is that something that you learned while you were at the startup?
I don't know that it was a lesson that I learned per se.
Okay.
I think I knew it going in.
Okay.
Right? Now, regardless of that, I still didn't go back into finance.
Right.
And I made the leap into startup land.
Yeah.
In a sector that I knew nothing about. So I mean, I don't want to shortchange me too much. I think I can take some risk and, understand how to take it, but I am not inherently a risky person per se. Like I want to jump off a cliff or I want to
try that out. Yeah.
Risky
See
thing.
what that's like. Yeah.
One of the things that an old boss of mine on the investing side used to just drill into me that has really helped me just think about life is this idea of risk-adjusted return.
Yeah.
Not just risky return.
RAR. Yeah.
Yeah. But what is the risk-adjusted return? And that everything in life, or that you can view so many things in life through that lens of risk-adjusted return. Yeah.
Yeah. We had a guest that we just talked about this, right? So his first corporate-y job was vitamin water, right? And so he had 2 offers. One was a new liquor brand. They offered him more cash and more equity. And then vitamin water offered less, but it was a rocket ship, right? And so he was like, these guys have more equity and money. And so he mentioned it to his friends and they said, you that doesn't mean anything. Like the liquor brand may not exist tomorrow, and water looks like it's going to IPO in 48 hours, right?
Yeah.
Like so, his risk adjusted return, paid off, right?
Yeah.
Even though initially it didn't look like more, but it did pay off, and I do think that's you know. For me as a founder, and I like there are other types of personalities, but it's almost like what is it called? It's like you intentionally avoid looking at it sometimes, like analyzing the risk adjusted return, right? Because either you think that's the right direction, but all the stats will say like that's not that won't be the right direction. But the very nature of startup is like that sometimes, right?
It's so true.
Like
It's so true.
the risk adjusted return is so low sometimes, and you're still doing it, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. No, it's so true. And, as you think about like paradox is the wrong word, and I can't think of what the right word is off the top of my head,
Hmm.
but maybe it's stupidity, not paradox. There is some level of that a founder has to have,
Like the
right?
willful blindness,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
Right. And that's why you've got to have an understanding of risk adjusted return, but also have faith in your own ability and your team's
Right.
ability to
Right.
continue to persevere and actually figure it out.
Right. Right.
Um, it is, I don't know what the right word is. Hopefully,
Yeah.
someone will tell us.
And when you were running Nori, right? Like there must have been moments of like big wins where you had a moment of clarity, or luck came by, right? That you believe now in hindsight was a big inflection point, right? And it may be tied to this what we're talking about, this willful blindness, or a route not taken, right? The narrow door, if you will. Like, do you have a story like that? Like when you were running the company, going against common sense.
Uh, no.
No, it was always common
Very
sense.
simply, I mean, did we go through like pitfalls
Yeah.
and, absolute moments of despair? Yes.
Mm,
I guess this is not so. Our first business line was selling to schools,
right.
and that business did well for a while, but it hit a ceiling really, really
Right.
hard. And we kind of languished for a while. We couldn't figure out how to get past that ceiling. And as we were trying to figure that out, we were introduced to a few business partners of ours.
Mm,
Um, one actually came through the website as like a contact form.
okay.
And I think maybe the willful ignorance there was just to follow every lead,
Uh,
because that was what really turned the business around, was
okay.
actually shifting from direct sales to schools. We still kept that business around, and we reinvigorated that product later on. But really, the core business was licensing our product and technology to other education institutions. It was just random, very random introductions here and
Mm,
there. And like I said, even like our biggest one actually came through our contact form on our
contact.
website.
Yeah. Contact us. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you get so many of those people who are pitching whatever, a lot of them you'll actually ignore. We followed up on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so that was like when you hit the ceiling, you were. I'm sure you were stressed, right? You were very, very stressed. But I've had this, and I think a lot. It's a common kind of founder thing where there's like stress paralysis, right? Like the inability to take some very decisive action, which in this case was actually following up with every lead, not knowing where it will go, even though it might have just been wasted time and energy. How did you like get over that like hump, if you had it at all?
Yeah. So I don't know that it was paralysis per se for us. It was as a banker, right?
Yeah.
And mind you, right, this is similar to my early days as a banker, because as a bio major, I knew nothing about finance, nothing about the markets, and I kind of went into this industry. As a banker, I knew nothing about education or technology or software development, but I went into this industry, and we hit this ceiling. And as a given my background as a banker, I put together like a 78-page presentation on what was going on, right?
Yeah.
Graphs of we tried this and we did this and
Okay.
whatever. And I kind of put this big presentation, and I scheduled meetings with all of our investors, and I went around to our investors, and I was going to do this 78-page presentation. And my first meeting was with a CEO who is based in Korea now. He was based here. His first company sold for hundreds of millions. His second company is now a unicorn. He is just an excellent operator. And I started this presentation, right? Mm-hmm. And he stops me and goes, "Dave, shut the fuck up," right? And he asked me the most simple question, and it has been the question that I ask now companies so frequently. Yeah. But he said, "Is this a sales and marketing issue, or is this a product issue?"
Right.
And I couldn't answer that question.
Interesting.
I hadn't thought about it in such basic terms.
Right.
Like, does the product suck, or is it just a question
you haven't distributed properly? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Or told the story. Yeah.
And it's so simple now thinking about it, but I had never thought about it in those terms. And that really helped. Because we thought we had something on the product side. We knew that the product worked, mm-hmm. but we weren't able to get to students. And so when we looked at these partnerships, or as we kind of stepped back at these partnerships, essentially what these partnerships did for us was allow us to focus on building product and leaving the sales and marketing or distribution or customer acquisition, or however you want to think about it, to our partners, because they already had the customers.
Right.
And so that symbiosis, was amazing, because it helped me to realize, hey, we just really weren't very good at sales and marketing. We could build good product because we knew that the product worked, was efficacious, and kids loved it. We just couldn't get in their hands. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of how really this B2B. I mean, in retrospect, we didn't know that or think about it in that way at the time.
Right.
But in retrospect, it really worked out that way.
Right. But that's so interesting, right? Because, and I've done this too personally, which is like, you think about a problem, right? Like that the business is facing or something like that. And your brain does a lot of calculus, right? That end up being abstractions, actually, because this is another willful blindness thing where you don't want to look at the fundamental issue. It's too ugly, right? It's too scary. It's too ugly. But if we change our social media platform, things will be different, right? The world will change for us. But it's never that simple, right? Maybe it's even more simple, but the solution is more complex, right? Like if it's a product issue, like you really have an issue. And sales and marketing, maybe you can outsource that, maybe you don't have to, but that just means you can't tell the story properly, or you're not connected to the right people. Right?
But that's the thing. What you just said there is exactly the point, which is sometimes you just have to go to the basics and understand, do you have product market fit, right?
Yeah. Right.
It's not sales and marketing product market fit, right? It's product market fit.
Yeah, that's right.
If the product actually delivers value,
yes,
and there is a market for it, that Venn diagram will eventually overlap.
Okay. So you think that, but it could be that it's too small. That could happen.
Absolutely. The market
where
could be too
it'd be
small.
too small, right?
Yeah. That's why this question of is something VC backable, right?
Yeah, right. That's
That
something that we're
the
asking
market
ourselves.
has to
Yeah,
be big enough in order for the way that venture returns actually work, in order for venture to actually be interested in a particular company. That's why.
it has to be
Right?
big enough. Yeah,
Yeah,
when you hit it,
you
it has
hear
to be
so
big
many
enough.
founders that say, I have a really good product that works, right? But no venture investors,
Yeah,
will invest in me. And,
yeah,
they're always telling me it's a good product, but why
yeah.
won't they invest? Right? Well, I mean, you just may not be venture backable. That doesn't mean that your
It's a bad
company
idea.
doesn't
Yeah,
work or your company can't be a big company, but you also need to understand the way that venture returns work. For a lot of investing, you have to have some empathy for the other side of the
they
table.
have LPs. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Yeah,
And they have a
yeah.
job too.
Mm-hmm. They think they have like a big bucket of money that they're not giving out, but
Yeah,
it's a job. Fundraising for them is as difficult, if not more difficult.
absolutely.
Yeah. And like, yeah, I think understanding that though does give an edge, right, for founders that understand how to position the pitch, right, or understanding the right audience, like who to get to for their company, for their market, and understanding those pain points, right?
Here's what I would say to that. I think it's understanding, of course. You're 100% right. But
Yeah,
it's founders who have empathy.
yeah.
And what I mean by that, it's, do you have empathy for your customer?
Mm.
Really understanding what their needs are
Hmm.
and building a product that solves their needs in a highly scalable way, right?
Mm.
Now, it's the same thing with venture. Do you have empathy for the other person across the table from you?
Yeah,
Do you understand what their needs are? What
right.
is a
Not
venture
one-sided, right,
investor's needs,
right,
right?
right.
Do you have that empathy and that desire to actually reach out and fully understand, to your point, understand
Yeah,
what is it that this other person needs?
right. Yeah,
I don't hear enough people talk about founder, product development, entrepreneurial journey in the context of this empathy for the person on the other side of the table.
yeah, yeah. That's actually a good point.
Whether it's
That's a
your
good point. Yeah,
employees, whether it's that empathy or that desire to understand the other person's needs
yeah,
has to be at the core of everything that you do.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. That that raises a good point though, because like I guess a lot of founders they feel like they're too busy or they don't have to like that's not that important, right, at the time. But like the more years I've done this also, individually understanding potential like my team members or my customers, even though that's not scalable, right, is more important than doing something that scales, particularly as leadership, right? Like understanding the pain points of the employees or their personal, like not to not to the privacy point, but understanding that they have 3 kids or 2 kids and like the schedules, but they're willing to more flexibility, they're willing to pull in the weekend, like whatever it is, right? Like and being able to understand that to an empathic sense, not just okay, how do we utilize that schedule properly, but being able to understand that, and then your clients too, right? Like really not just trying to sell or pitch, but this goes to the funding aspect too. Like I wonder how many founders go into a VC pitch going, I understand where you're coming from, right? To the VC, you didn't have a great year last year. Let me tell you how we're gonna fix that, right?
That's
And
right.
yeah, yeah.
Right? That's actually understanding your counterparty.
Right, right. And that changes the dynamics of every discussion, really, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Just flips the whole dialogue. People become more transparent and things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's more authentic,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like the balance of that. It's like taking a step back because the stresses of being like a founder, particularly early stage, and like worrying about like, what if I fail? Like, what if this doesn't work? When in reality, that is also an abstraction of like missing the point, which is what you're trying to do,
Yeah.
right? It's not building a website. Like that's not the vision, right? That's not the goal. So understanding what you're trying to do fundamentally, even in the midst of despair, so to speak.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that actually carries through though, right? That actually does bring you to the other side. Like the the material successes, let's call it, right? Like, okay, you got the funding, or I got the big win as a client. Ironically, I think that only lasts so long, right? Because you're gonna hit the next hurdle again,
Yeah.
like the next difficulty again. So there needs to be some solution that's long standing on why I'm doing this every time I run into a wall. You know.
So I have this mental framework that I like to talk to founders about, which
Nice.
is, I mean, given that Nori was a math company, it's a math analogy. But, to your point about kind of focus, where people are trying to focus, they're obviously trying to focus on surviving. They're trying to focus on revenue. They're trying to focus on raising money. The unfortunate thing with all of that focus is that it's actually focused on the wrong thing.
Right.
So revenue, right, is a derivative of something.
Yep.
And people talk about like, oh, I'm so focused on revenue. Well, if you're focused on revenue, then you're not focusing on what's driving revenue. And ultimately, our goal as founders, especially at this early stage, is about trying to understand the integral of the derivative, right? So the underlying curve that derives the derivative.
Right.
And so I say this a lot. It's like, what is your integral? Right.
Yep.
And basically the integral reflects the actual value that derives whatever you're thinking about. Whether you're thinking about raising money from an investor, whether you're thinking about, the number of customers you have, whether you're thinking about all of these quote unquote KPIs, ultimately those things are derived from the underlying value. And are you delivering that value to whoever counterparty that you're talking to?
Yeah.
Right. So from a VC perspective, are you delivering the value that they need? Right. The potential for, $1 billion exit for their fund. Are you delivering the value of your product to each individual customer? Have you discovered what that value is and discovered where the Venn diagram of the value and the customer kind of overlap?
Right.
And whether or not there are more Venn diagrams of customers, right, that you can use to expand. But do you understand what that ICP is, right?
Yeah.
But it's this idea of like, hey, let's work backwards towards really understanding what our integral is, as opposed to focusing on the derivative. The derivative is just a signal for your integral.
Right.
Maybe I took that analogy too far.
Well, I mean, for those that are less math versed, basically, I think you're saying is that it's the representation, right? It's what we're trying to understand, because the area under a curve is not, it's an amorphous thing. So you have to say, okay, these are the metrics that we're looking at, but in actuality, that's the end result. That is the abstraction, actually, not the core value of what you're building.
Exactly right.
Right. And like why people are paying for it. Like that's all abstraction. Like your pricing model and subscription or freemium, like those are all like it's all BS. Like at the end of the day, those are optimizations once you have the PMF and people extract value from what you're offering.
That's exactly right. Those things just reflect whether or not that value exists.
Yeah. I think that, I think for folks that are early founders, like even that it sounds very abstract, right? Like I'm trying to start this business, right? Like what is David saying right now? Like this is philosophical. It's like, but it is, right? It's existentially, it is abstract. It's like, I think the common theme of all startup founders is like, why am I doing this? Like at the hardest times, right? Like, what am I doing?
But honestly, that's one of the reasons why, like for some of the angel investments that I have done, I really will search out a founder that built a product because they experienced this problem, right? And that really drives home this idea of value, right?
Yeah.
Man, like I advised this one company, he was a doctor and he was a surgeon, an orthopedic surgeon, and he lost 2 surgeries in one day that cost his practice $200,000.
Oh,
The
okay.
reason why was because one of the neighbors canceled at the last minute because they couldn't like drive the patient to the surgery or pick them up, right? Because
Okay.
obviously after surgery you can't drive yourself, right?
Right.
And the other one was that they couldn't find a medically licensed translator for the
Oh, because they
surgery.
didn't speak English. English was
Yeah, they
okay.
didn't speak English.
Yeah.
So this doctor built a company that helped transport people in a
And provides
non-emergency like transportation way and an on-demand, what is
translation.
that, translation service.
Okay.
Because he realized that, hey, wait, I'm not the only one that is actually having this problem.
Yeah.
As he started to talk to his other surgeon friends, a lot of surgeries are being canceled for these 2 reasons.
Right.
And it's costing the system hundreds or billions and billions of dollars,
Yeah.
because of this problem. And so
Yeah.
let's go and solve it.
Yeah.
Understanding like founders that have actually gone through that problem and are developing a product
Yeah.
really always have their, not, I shouldn't say always, many times have the eye on the ball, because
Yeah.
they're always going back to that root of like, what are we actually building here? We're building something that I went through, that I struggled with, and now I can create a scalable solution for other
Yeah.
people, and that there's enough
Right.
people out there that I can build a business around this.
That you can use the solution for. Yeah. It's not similar, but that reminds me of a story that a friend of mine that is a doctor, retinal surgeon, but he wanted to be an entrepreneur. So it wasn't direct to his practice or anything he was doing, but he wanted to do. This was like 7 years ago, maybe even more, telemedicine in the U.S. Right, and it was like before the phones were good enough to do like video chatting or whatever. And
Yeah.
we were talking, and I remember like I wasn't really providing advice because I don't know anything about the medical field, but it was just kind of like the obvious questions I have are there even like guidelines on how HIPAA deals with the fact that it's digital, right? And like, do you need a third party storage? And I remember asking that because that's the only thing I knew was that like HIPAA sucks,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
HIPAA's a nightmare. And then he's like, oh, we haven't thought about that. And I was like, yeah, it's probably something to think about. And then they figured it out. Right? Like there was a way to do it and like encrypt the data, like whatever. But it was like 3 doctors, and it was hard for them to like focus and scale. They're all surgeons, right? So it was like difficult to scale. He realized the problem, like for practices where you could do so much more with telemedicine, especially if they didn't need to come in, right? You could do the consults and say, okay, I do think it's a serious issue, you should come in, or not, right? Then you could save a ton of time on more serious patients. But then he wasn't able to get it off the ground before COVID.
Oh.
And so like, it's like a time and place kind of thing, but that resonates a lot too. It's like, what is the problem that, you see, maybe even not personally faced, but you have to like have seen it and felt it. And like, for me personally, I was aghast at how the financial system was run. 25-year-olds closing deals that are like that doesn't make it, with no sleep for 5 days, and that's the guidance.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is how billions are moved, and that's just the kind of way things work. And then like everything was like paperwork, right? Like you're literally shifting paper, right, to get signatures. You had a stack of signatures that everyone needed to sign, and you're like carrying things around. And you always think about it, it's like, oh, there must be a better way, right? This is before DocuSign, but like there must be a better way, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, look, that's why like the advice that I give to like founders as they're trying to pitch their product is, don't tell me about your idea. Tell me about the problem that you're solving. Right. Let's start.
Piece of advice.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, start with that framing, and I think that helps people to understand better this idea that I have, or this product that I've built, right, has some purpose in life. Like, for example,
I'm not
telemedicine.
making it up. I'm not making it up. Yeah.
But think about telemedicine, right?
Yeah.
If you didn't start with this idea of there are some times where I don't need to drive 20 minutes to my doctor's office to
Yeah.
wait another 2 hours to get into a doctor,
Right.
right? I need some advice right now.
Right.
Hence
Is it
telemedicine.
serious or is it not? Do I have to actually
Yeah.
go or not? Yeah.
Now, but if you just started with this idea of telemedicine, oh, it's
Yeah.
an interesting idea.
Seems interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
How do I put that idea into context?
Yeah. You know, like that. I actually, one of the pieces of advice I gave for that was like, I forget the telemedicine and the efficiency part. Tell me how many lives can be saved because you didn't waste time with patients that aren't critical, right? And
Yeah.
you can address more critical issues. That is impact, right? Not how many calls can we take on the app, right? And so you're right. Like I think every pitch should start that way, not how genius my solution is
Yeah.
about something, you know. And it goes back to the other point that you were having, which is like, not call it 10%. I think that's being quite generous. Though, like 10% is outlier expertise, right? Like the founders, like that's 10%. Like they have like the secret sauce, but it's 10%. You know, like there's still 90% that needs to be proven out. And so that is more about, do I properly understand the problem and the value that I want to bring to the table, right? And that I think is a great piece of advice for founders. You know, we're running up on time, but Dave, you know, you've been advising like more startups, you know, and after the exit, like what would you say? I mean, all of this was advice, like great advice, right, for our founders. Like in the current environment, knowing what you know about venture funding right now, and I have an idea. I'm going to do everything that you told me so far. What other final piece of advice would you leave our audience, like as they're trying to get their idea off the ground?
Getting their idea off the ground. You know, so there's two last thoughts. Let me just put it there.
Okay.
Two last thoughts. The first thought in terms of getting your idea off the ground, and you know, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but solve a problem and understand who you're solving that problem for. Do a little bit more than just it's 18 to 24-year-olds.
Oh, like this is the addressable market.
Yeah. Let's be a little bit more thoughtful there.
Yeah.
Right. And really tell me, it's folks that actually just bought a car. I don't know. I'm totally making that up, right? Yeah. Let's actually really understand the background framework as to who we're solving this problem for and explain why they are the people and then solve that other problem.
Right.
So that's kind of the first thing in terms of getting a product off the ground. And as a corollary to that, it's very much, hey, go talk to folks. Get out of your ivory tower, actually boots on the ground, talk to folks. That is, just do that.
Yeah.
These are all very, very, basic,
right.
blocking and tackling things, but those are the things that you got to do.
You would think it's basic, right? Yeah.
The last other thing that I want to just kind of hit home is this idea of value, and that as founders, we have to break up our journey into what I like to describe as two different kind of parts. The first part is our timeshare and our mind share, right? Timeshare is, hey, there is a lot of stuff we've got to do. We got to set up QuickBooks. We got to set up HubSpot. We got to write emails. We got to have an Excel sheet. There is just so much shit to do, right? That's our timeshare, right?
Yeah.
We can't let our timeshare dictate our mind share.
Okay.
Our mind share is, what are we obsessing about as we're taking a shit, right? Or we're
Okay.
doing whatever.
Yeah.
What are we obsessing about?
Yeah.
And that obsession, or that process of thinking about what we're obsessing about, has to be very deliberate.
Yes.
We have to be obsessing about what is our inner, what is the
Yeah.
value that we're
Yeah.
actually delivering.
Yeah.
When we're taking a shit, right? We
Yeah.
cannot be thinking about how much revenue do we have? How much revenue do we have? What's our key? If you're thinking about that, you're putting your mind share to work
You're attacking
on
the
the
time.
wrong
Yeah.
thing,
Right.
on the wrong things.
Right. 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 Right.
Your mind share has to be focused on that one thing of delivering value to your customers.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
And we've
Mm.
got to delineate between our timeshare and our mind share. Those two
Yeah.
things, people just don't delineate enough,
Yeah.
uh, and they get lost in their own thoughts.
But I do think, that last point, it's super valuable, but it's learned. It's like a callus, right?
Oh,
That you learn about the day-to-day shit,
yeah,
and you're like, I'll worry about that later because I need to use my value time, right? My uninterrupted morning hours where I'm brainstorming about hard things or having the hard meetings with the team trying to build something out, and then somebody sends me an email about something. Like, you just ignore that for
yeah,
now. You can deal with it later. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
It is a learned and practiced trait,
Right,
but
right.
people have to know that they've got to do that.
Yeah, yeah. That's such a great one. I do think a lot of our audience, or at least the people that we've talked to, and you've talked to as well, it's hard to get out of your own head,
Yeah,
right? Like, particularly early stage, it's the revenue. It's what if I fail? The shame. What if my friends hate me? And, like, whatever. But it's waking up, putting one foot in front of the other, but doing something meaningful. You play a lot of tennis, and I've started doing like the powerlifting thing. But exercise has given me a great lesson in that, right? Like, you don't have 4 hours to go to the gym. So you have to learn how to do the 4 hour thing in 40 minutes, which other people can't do, and get the hell in and out meaningfully. Don't hurt yourself, all right? You got to stretch, you got to do this, you got to do this, but I'm able to have that impact in that short period of time. And that goes to startup life too,
yeah,
right? Like, that one tip that people give, which is you should do all your hard thinking before you're tired, you're physically tired, or else you won't be able to actually do the hard thinking. So I've done that for a couple of years now, which is, 9 to 12 is where all the meetings are or whatever. Like, but I don't take like difficult meetings in the afternoon. That's for the next day. It can wait, right? It's for the next day, and then I could do some more homework in the afternoon. So that's, I think, in a nutshell, I think you've really put all the things that early stage founders need to do to get off the ground. We're out of time for this episode, but we're going to have Dave back in the future. Dave's also on the board, so you're going to see a lot of opportunities to talk to Dave, to listen to his advice. Dave, thank you so much for spending the time on this episode with us, and we'll see you next time.
thanks, Sang.